Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean by the lethargic soul?
Imam Bakhsh Nasikh has this really powerful couplet where he says, Zinda dili zindagi ka hai naam, murda dil khak jiya karte hain. He says that having an impassioned heart is the name of life. Life itself is to have an impassioned heart. Those who have dead hearts already live in the grave. The problem that we have, right? We've been sold this American Muslim dream. And it's not just the American Muslim dream. It's kind of like the Muslim dream now in the world. And what that is, you get good grades in school to go to a good college. You go to a good college so that you can get a good job. You get a good job so you can get married. You get married so you can have children. You have children so they can go to good schools. See, and the cycle continues. I call this the marriage industrial, the family industrial complex, where Muslims have family to raise family to have family, right? It's just a giant circle. Every dog can live that existence. That's a very harsh statement, but it's also the truth. Every animal can live an existence in which they just fulfill their basic animal needs to have progeny so that they can fulfill their animal needs to have progeny. There's no difference between that and a gorilla's existence. What makes humanity different is that we are the creatures that have the trust of Tawheed, the test of Tawheed. We are the only creatures in existence that are driven not just by the animal instinct, but by the instinct for pursuing something greater than ourselves. Spiritual lethargy is when you as an individual, you as a person, stop caring about, stop being impassioned about, stop having the drive for your own spiritual growth and spiritual kind of realization through your action in the world. And instead, you're just satisfied with living this animalistic existence of mere existence until you reach your death and then hope that with your big toe you get into the gate of Jannah. Don't aspire to get your little pinky into the last gate of Jannah. Aspire to be with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his neighborhood in Jannah.
So how do we cultivate a culture in the Muslim world of that mentality, of reaching for the stars, of being passionate?
Well, you do it in three ways. First is education. Second is acculturation. And the third is preparation. And then you let the people who are going to aspire, and the ones who don't, be as they want to, right? Because you can't control, you can only direct. Education has to be around changing our mentality from a mentality of people who are only really interested in getting the least of the akhirah and the least of the dunya in order to live a comfortable existence, right? Education has to be where we show people through the Quran and Sunnah that they are meant for more, that their purpose is more. Their personal purpose is to aspire to the love of Allah, and their societal purpose is to be the banner holders of La ilaha illallah. One, that's education. Acculturation is where you create the environment, what's sometimes called the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, the environment in which people are competing with each other to reach the pleasure of Allah. سابقوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم. Race with each other for the forgiveness of your Lord. Right? Like the Sahaba. The Sahaba used to fight with each other, race with each other, compete with each other to try to get to that pleasure of Allah. This is done through art, really. Art is what I call the missionary of ideas. what I mean by missionary ideas is, if you ask a random American, right, why do you love, let's say their hobby that they're really passionate about is underwater basket weaving or something, right? And you ask them,
Is that a thing?
I don't know, that's not. I'm like trying to pick that one thing that doesn't exist,
You did a good job.
But there's gonna be like a subreddit for like underwater basket weaving. And there's gonna be like that one guy on your comment be like, I love underwater basket weaving. But if you ask any American, like, okay, why do you love underwater basket weaving? Like, it makes me feel like I have a meaning in life. It gives me purpose. Gives me meaning, right? You can ask them about underwater basket weaving. You can ask them about family. Why do you love your children? Like, oh, I feel like I have meaning, right? Where does this language come from? They haven't read Sartre. They haven't read Camus. They haven't read Nietzsche. Right? They haven't read the existentialists. They haven't read Kierkegaard. Like, they haven't read the existentialists. But this is existentialist philosophy. Like, part and parcel, 100% existentialist philosophy. Where does it get to them? The shows they watch, the music they listen to, the movies they watch, the books they read. Art took the philosophy and made it belief.
And what do you mean by existentialist philosophy?
Existentialism basically is it tries to deal with the question of, if there's no God, what do we do with life?
Oh, I see.
Right? And the basic answer they come to is you have to find your own meaning for existence. There's no objective meaning to life, right? The meaning to life is whatever gives you purpose. The reason why you get up in the morning, that gives you joy and happiness and contentment and that's your meaning in life. It's called authenticity and self-realization. These are all, like this whole self-realization things, are all very deeply embedded within existentialist philosophy. Nobody reads Camus. Like, have you even heard of Camus?
No.
Have you heard of Sartre?
No.
But the concepts are familiar to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they came through the art. They came through the movies. They came through the literature. They came through the music. They came through the games. They came through all of these things. Like, I'll give you a perfect example of this. What's the difference between a JRPG and an ARPG, an American RPG versus a Japanese RPG? You play video games?
Not enough to know that.
Okay, so there's this entire genre called an RPG where it's story-based, right? It's character and story-based. The difference between an American RPG and a Japanese RPG is that the Japanese RPGs are all very heavily story-based that have one direction, and you're just discovering the story. The American RPGs are what's called open world. You choose what you want to do. Whatever you enjoy doing, that's what you do. Right? This is because American RPGs are heavily influenced by existentialist philosophy. Not by reading Camus and Sartre themselves, but by the literary tradition that develops out of it and influences them eventually. The JRPGs are not. They're very traditional storytelling. Art is the missionary of ideas. If you want people to believe in something, don't tell them. Show them.
Why then have Muslims neglected art?
Because Muslims believed that if they were able to develop hard power, they would be able to better the situation of Muslims. And so they neglected soft power.
Because when I tell my mom that my goal, that the podcast is just a step for me to get to a goal where I can build movies and TV shows, she hates that idea. She's like, what are you going to be, an actor? And I'm like, no, like I want to build studios.
Tell me, has she watched Arturo?
She has.
How much?
She watched
the whole thing, right?
She's the biggest media consumer I've ever seen.
The whole thing, right?
Yeah.
My mom watches Arturo, like she watched it religiously. Like there's like 100 and something episodes of that show, right? Each one more ridiculous than the next. It's just like, okay, I stopped watching Arturo where they put Turgut Alp, right? And he got captured by the Crusaders, and they put him on the Wheel of Fortune and force fed him blue Kool-Aid, and that brainwashed him. and he forgot who he was. It was a bizarre episode. That's where it jumped the shark for me, right?
Are you serious?
Oh, it wasn't a Wheel of Fortune. It was like
that
a
wheel that
wheel
they
thing,
torture.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
The Kool-Aid, is that blood? Is that? Are you?
No. It was just like the Chappelle's purple drink.
Yeah.
It was blue drink. It just looked like somebody got Kool-Aid out of the fridge and like I was like, oh, this is a drug. It's gonna drug you. That's why I laughed so hard in that scene. I think that was it.
You know,
for me.
I think I met the actor, and I didn't know who he was. And they I was doing a photo shoot for him, and everyone was freaking out. A bunch of Daisy uncles and aunts with their little Arturo helmets and swords. I'm like, what's going on? Who is this guy? Then I found out later who he was.
Yeah. So what I mean to say is, Arturo is, I think, as a literature major, Arturo is a terrible show. Its story is really like it is comical, but it's very important. And the reason why it's very important is all of a sudden, all of these uncles and aunties and the nth consultant at Deloitte, right, was brought face to face of what is the possibility of Muslim art, Muslim popular art. That isn't just, a Muslim cameo in look, did you see that show? It had a hijabi in it, right? But it's actually something that celebrates Islam and Muslims.
Do you think it was also Muslim fundamentalism that destroyed art? I mean, I went to a Salafi school. I won't say but I went to a heavily Salafi school, which I won't comment on how it does with the story. But when I was like 5, 6, man, they would yell at us if we drew something. They would yell at us, I guess, because the eyes and stuff like that. But
I think actually
that made me uncomfortable as a 6-year-old. Even I was like, what's going on here?
I think what ruins art more is Muslim reform ideas of how we're going to save the Muslim world. What happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s is, I mean, it's hard for us to actually imagine the shock value of the collapse of Muslim civilization, and it's also hard for us to imagine how people who have no contact with modernity are suddenly coming to contact with medicine and engineering and military and politics that is coming from the West, and seeing the stark difference where, like, people whose idea of like fast travel as a horse are now suddenly taking railways from India all the way to like Mecca, right? Like that level of shock to them, they are like, well, the reason why the West is the way it is because they have all this scientific and technological discovery. So for Muslims to get that, they have to have their own scientific and technological discovery. They have to master it, and so we're going to send all of our kids, best and brightest, to scientific and technological discovery and understanding. And that just then becomes culture. And part of the culture becomes like, it starts from this like, okay, no, we have to push the best and the brightest towards science, STEM, right? And then because that becomes prestigious, right? People start doing it because they want their neighbors to say like, oh, his son became a doctor. What did your son become? Right? And you know how our cultures are, right? Like the most important thing, like the reason why we make decisions in our life is so that we can go to a party and say, my son became a doctor and he went to Harvard, right? Like we live for that like rush of prestige. But what that actually was, it was a poor understanding of what power actually is. And now I think we're coming to a realization of what power actually is, right? And so we have a bit of a renaissance in Muslim art. But art is the missionary of ideas. You can have as many ideas as you want. If they don't get to the people, they might as well not exist. You have to have Muslim art. Real, authentic, serious, value-driven, and excellent Muslim art in order for Muslims to even begin to imagine themselves, believe in themselves as having a love of Allah-driven goal for excellence.
This is insane because I'm reflecting on the Renaissance period, and I'm just realizing every time they start the story of the Renaissance, they start with art.
Mm-hmm. In
And
fact,
and I always skipped to science and thought that's where.
in almost all of the major movements begin intellectually and artistically. Almost all of them. In fact, the major humanists, right, the major Renaissance workers, thinkers, their first engagement with Greco-Roman works was through the arts. Art is the way that you take grand philosophical ideas and you turn them into beliefs that motivate and drive people.
And isn't that why in the Islamic world, geometry was such a huge piece of art, because it was the love of the abstract, which is Allah. Allah is abstract, right? Or Allah demands for us to understand the abstract, the one in the many, the asma, the names, in which, like the scholars comment, please correct me, that when Allah taught Adam the names of all things, it was the abstract. Allah could show Adam a cup, and he doesn't have to show him a cup again. Doesn't, if you change that cup up a little bit on a human being, he's not going to be like, so what is that? Is that a puck? Like, no. He understands the abstract. He understands that's still a cup and that one's a cup.
This is a very, very important thing you bring up about Muslim history. We love to talk about Muslim scientists and Muslim mathematicians and Muslim physicists and Muslim this and Muslim that. But what's actually holding them up all up is the spirituality that's communicated through art. The amount of Muslim art, and excellent Muslim art, that is being created, right? Rumi is one of the best-selling authors of poetry in English. Okay? Where's that coming from? Right? There's this deep Muslim spirituality that's being now passed on to non-Muslim cultures because the art of Islam was driving a certain directionality. You lose art, you lose culture. You lose culture, you lose people. You lose people, you lose civilization. Without Muslim art, you cannot have Muslim civilization.